2, 1. Dr. David Strubler. Nice to have you. So I just wanted to quickly introduce you to the audience and start the conversation. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
So you're a professor of human resources and human resource development at Oakland University. You've worked as a mountaineering instructor and social worker, developing wilderness experience programs for emotionally challenged youth. He spent over a year of his life living outside. He teaches doctoral, master's, and bachelor students in organizational leadership at Oakland University. He's a writer and a contributor for Psychology Today, Harvard Business Review, etc., and writes on a whole host of topics, including interdependence, hyper-individualism, narcissism, and apprenticeships. We'll be talking more about most of those categories here. He's also the winner of many awards, including the most recent one, which it was in 2020, the Martin Luther King Jr. Dreamer Award. And beyond all of those accomplishments, you have been a great help to me in kind of defining my future with regard to college, but then my career as well. It's been awesome to know you and appreciate your advice and comfort in times of confusion. And I hope that people listening who are younger can find some solace in our conversation today, especially coming from a professional educator, someone who works as a teacher and a professor. So to start, I thought I would ask you a little bit about this issue of interdependence, because we've had many hikes over the course of years and chats about this idea that as Americans, we're a little bit too individual, and there are some repercussions to this. There are downsides, and maybe you can speak to what it is about interdependence that makes it so positive for people and in the lives of those around them.
Well, I think a simple way to frame it is something we're all familiar with.
Yeah.
And that is we all start out dependent right. on our parents. Yeah. And then increasingly we move towards being independent. Yeah. And then eventually, as we mature, we get married, we have children, we participate in the community, we become what we call interdependent. Yeah. So the simplest way to think about it is interdependence is maturity. And independence is a necessary stage for each human being to go through. It's necessary, but it's short-lived. It's not intended to be a lifelong state.
Right.
And that's where we probably run into some difficulties. Our country was founded on the Declaration of Independence. And of course, at the time, that simply meant we were becoming independent of England to get away from the king's tyranny and rule and all that sort of thing. And that's what it meant at the time. But it would never cross the minds, for example, of our founding fathers to think of, I'm independent. I do what I want to do.
Right.
That's what we call extended adolescence. Mm. And so we're a young nation, and a relatively young nation. And so what happens is we were dependent on England. We became independent from England. And as Alec de Tocqueville, the great historian, in 1834, when he wrote about democracy in America, one of the first things he said is, I fear, that the idea of independence could morph or change into isolation. And I think that's what we're seeing. Certainly with COVID, we've seen a high degree of isolation actually increased because of it, the shelter downs and all that sort of thing. But even prior to that, we saw a high degree of what one author calls hyper-individualism. And in fact, several authors now call it that, hyper-individualism, where everything is about me and what I want to do. And, in the old days, we used to call that being self-centered or something like that. But it really goes way beyond that. because it's isolating oneself by saying, I'm going to go do what I want to do, you go do what you want to do, but there's no sense of interdependence, there's no sense of community in that. And this phenomenon, according to one of the scholars I talked to in Dubai, actually recently, Dr. Ganesh, and what she said is that this hyper-individualism is not just here in the United States, where she has lived. It is worldwide, and probably the reason why it's worldwide is the internet and travel, the combination of, we have a global world that we live in. So as a result of that, we're seeing across the world a focus on hyper-individualism, which, from my point of view, is essentially extended adolescence and therefore is not healthy because ultimately people don't mature and come into mature community. So that's the idea of that. And she also talks about the idea of the hyper-spectacular. Everything has got to be spectacular, hyper-spectacular. And so she calls it the hyper-modern society. And that it's because and it's hyper-speed as well. Just think of it. Recently, my wife, during the COVID shelter down, she didn't want to go to the grocery store, so she called Kroger's. In 2 hours, we had all of our groceries, which is faster than she could have done it herself. Amazon, will deliver your products in, hyper speed. Now, but think about the impact of that. First of all, we expect everything to be fast and for us as individuals. And that's our expectation. So we place that demand on others. We expect our friends and our family to hyperspeed response to us when we send out a text. Everything is sped up, but what it does is it causes anxiety, a high degree of anxiety in our society. And this is the world in which we live now. So the reason I started pursuing the idea of interdependence is interdependence is sort of the opposite of that. And I would even go so far as to say the cure for it. Because when I'm interdependent, that means that I do have a responsibility to myself and to others as well. It's not either or, it's both and, which, by the way, is the first principle of interdependence. In other words, we can take two things that are true at the same time and say, okay, it's not either or between them. They're both true at the same time. And I need to do both of these things. I don't get to choose between two things. I have to do both if I want to be a healthy individual and have healthy relationships with others. So, simple one. It is, as we're speaking today, we're having a conversation. It's both and. You are sharing a podcast with a lot of people, a community of people, and individually I get to participate. Individually, you get to participate, and we're also thinking about our community that we're talking to today. It's not either or. It's always, always, always both and. So that's the first principle. And the second principle is what I call civil engagement. People need to be thoroughly engaged in their work, in their family life, in their community life, in their friendships. They need to be engaged. And all the research shows this, that the number one health factor, and I'm even talking about physical health, is connectedness above everything else. There's not exercise, not diet. It is the healthiest people that live the longest are the most connected to others, even if they have poor diets. And a lot of the research shows people living to 100 and beyond simply because they're so meaningfully connected. But I also added the other word in there. I said civil engagement. And for such a time as this, and we've gone through a lot of difficult times recently, we see a very polarized nation, for example, politically, and extremes political extremes, either or thinking. Either it's this way or it's that way. Either we, for example, we get rid of all guns, or everybody has guns, 100% access. Either or. Is that what we really want? I don't think so. And a recent survey that was done showed 70% of Americans want some kind of gun control. Even the people that own guns wanted a reasonable sense of gun control. Why? Well, 50% of the gun fatalities are suicide, which has gone up 30% in the last 10 years in our country. Why? Because people are living in a hyper-modern, hyper-speed society, highly individualistic, which causes them to fall into isolation. Isolation is one of the number one causes of suicide. Absolutely. The other 50% are homicides. So, but we want to come up with an approach as a nation, as a state, as a community that is both and that is civil and requires civil engagement. So what we do is we work through these problems with the idea in mind that there is a solution. There is an opportunity here. But if we believe that there is no opportunity, that it can only be one or the other, that's what I call stuckness. Actually, Robert Pirsig, in his book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, first came up with that term, the idea of being stuck. That's what either or is. It's either one way or the other. And we're never going to agree on this. And that turns into conflict. But the problem is unhealthy conflict. You can have conflict. I mean, that's normal. Everybody has conflict. And I guess that's one of the things I want to say to our audience today is that please understand that conflict is normal. That if you're in a conflict, that doesn't mean you should end your relationship. It means you should work through your relationship. You should work through the conflict. And if you have a both and mindset and you're committed to being civil in your engagement, you can work through probably almost any problem. And our nation needs to learn this. And our leaders of our nation need to learn this because we're seeing adolescent behavior from the podium during debates. That's not helpful. It's not mature. It's not interdependence. So it's incredibly important for us as individuals, in our community, our families, and as a nation to adopt these principles of interdependence. The next one is called cross-collaboration. The idea there is simply that, okay, now that we've committed ourselves to both and thinking, now that we've committed ourselves to civil engagement, that allows us to work together and co-create solutions. And a lot of times when we get together, for example, in our organizations, well, we say, well, we only have so much money and we can't spend it we can't do everything. So what we'll do is we'll eliminate that program, get rid of it, and we'll keep this one. Prioritization. Okay. Or maybe worse yet, we compromise. We give a little bit to either, and neither does well. Neither program works. Neither product sells. Why? Because we don't devote enough to it. But part of the problem is that we believe that we're resource scarce. But that's actually not true. When people are interdependent, they can co-create solutions, and they can even sometimes take two priorities and leverage from each priority resources for the other. It's about creativity. And that's why I love creative people. And of course, I live in a house full of creative people. My wife is a violinist in the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and an artist. All of my sons are musicians and artists. I'm the only non-creative person, I guess you could say, in my household. But I love creative people because they don't think inside the box. And a recent example of this is I met with Father John Cochran, who is the head pastor at St. Augustine's Monastery. And at one point in his life, he was in charge of a nonprofit in Philadelphia to serve the poor. That was his mission in life. So a woman comes in and says, my daughter can't graduate from college. She's $1,000 short. The college will not give her her degree. And he said, so I had a decision to make. I knew that I didn't have $1,000. But he also said, I also knew that my mission was to serve those in need. So I wrote her a check for $1,000. And then what did I do? I got on the phone and I started calling people. And within a few hours, I had $1,000. But if I had taken the position that it's not in my budget, either or, either I do it or I don't do it. But if I'd said, no, I'm going to do my mission, I'm going to do my purpose, and this is true for each one of us individually, whatever your calling in life is, whether you're an artist or a musician or an engineer or an accountant or whatever it might, a college professor, whatever you might be, what you want to do is start with your purpose. Be purpose-led. And by the way, not purpose-driven. Be purpose-led. And when you're purpose-led and you work with others, you can together co-create solutions that solve the problem, or even better yet, create whole new opportunities that never existed before you co-created. And it's an exciting thing. And then the last principle is really purpose. Whatever you do in your own life has to be based on your purpose. But when you come together with others in interdependence, you must realize that you are doing this for a purpose greater than yourself and greater than yourselves, even as a group. There's something more important than just my own individualistic goals. Not that we throw away our goals, and we want to meet our goals for sure. But it's so important to remember that when you're in community, this is where the greatest set of resources come.
Sure.
And so, for example, the apprenticeship program that I'm doing in Pontiac, I built a tiny house with a group of 5 young men who had never built anything before. I wanted to see if they could do this. But I wanted to expose them to all the skilled trades. I'm a big advocate of the trades, and I want young people that have a calling and a talent and an interest to go into the trades. And I don't want anybody telling them that they should go to college when, in fact, they should go into the trades. 40% of the people in the state of Michigan have a bachelor's degree. That's great. It's the highest it's ever been. But what about the other 60%? And all the new jobs, by the way, and I'm saying this to our young people who are listening, all the new jobs, with few exceptions, require some kind of training, some kind of learning. And it doesn't mean going to college. It could be an apprenticeship program. It could be on-the-job learning, which, by the way, 70% of all learning takes place on the job. Not in classes or anything else. It's on the job. So there's lots of ways to learn. Some of us don't learn well in a classroom, and some of us do. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you find out how you learn and find out what you want to do, what you want to be, what your purpose is, and then pursue that in your own way. And that's individualistic on one hand, it is. On the other hand, we are part of a community that needs people. I mean, right now, 811,000 open jobs in 2026. So we're only talking 5 years from now. We're already short about 100,000 skilled trades workers right now.
Wow.
So we put together this interdependent project in Pontiac, Michigan. I've got 12 construction companies working on this, and I've got 6 nonprofits working on it. And what we do is we all come together, we meet, and we share resources. And guess what? when you share resources, you're not short on resources. There's more than enough money. There's more than enough resources available in this world. What happens is organizations and individuals go into their little silos and they hide there individualistically. And then they can't leverage resources from each other. So, for example, Oakland University runs the apprenticeship class through our continuing education division. The Pontiac Promise Zone provides scholarships for that class. Habitat for Humanity provides workplace experience. Young people actually go out and work on homes in Pontiac for Habitat for Humanity. The employers come in and they bring the students in to job shadow. They show them what they do for a living. They introduce them to electrical and plumbing and masonry and everything you can imagine. And so everybody is working together. And one of my favorite phrases that comes from the Bible is all things work together for good. That's a good definition of interdependence right there. All things work together for good. But it can't work together for good if you're only focused on just yourself. And also you're missing out on relationships, connectedness, and good health if you just go off and do your own thing. And that's what we used to say back in the 60s, by the way.
Reminds me of something that Perry Shaw in podcast episode 2 talks about the importance of being basically doing things for yourself, but then and doing things for other people, and the significance of doing things for other people. When you do other things, or when you do things for other people, rather, you're actually doing things for yourself.
Yes.
In a sense, you're helping yourself by helping other people. In the media world, for instance, kind of the world I'm just starting to dip my toes into, you have to give away a significant amount of content or give away yourself in a large part to gain the trust of your audience, but before they believe in you and support you, or even consider supporting you financially, right? And so and it really, I think, speaks to the fundamental nature of human beings to need to understand that the people that they're learning from, or that they're partnering with, not only are qualified, but are doing it for the right reasons. That they actually care about the people that they're helping, and and so having that that mindset of interdependence is huge, I think, for even growing a business. Helping other people is the best way to grow your business. It's like the effect of a giveaway. You give a product away, but what you're effectively doing is you're saying to the world that you want to encourage or attract people to you by virtue of doing this good thing. I'm doing something good, and that encourages trust, right? So, and not to use it in a manipulative way, and maybe if you start out with the wrong intention, the manipulative tendency to try and reward, to manipulate people's reward systems. The beauty of that is, like Martin Luther says, he takes like he actually says, I think God, paraphrasing, but God uses our basically evil desires and turns them to good, like our desire for pride or ego boost, turn into something productive. It's like our desire for lust to marriage, to a good thing. In other words, if your intention is to manipulate people because of this tendency to or desire to grow yourself by helping others, right? If you're doing it with this contingency of you have to give me something in return, well, you'll see, I think, soon enough that the reward of helping people in and of itself is very pure. and it's a very positive, pure motivation. I think it's the cure is built in. So if you have, for instance, a manipulative person or a narcissistic person who is really just facilitating activity for themselves, positive activity, they're helping other people out, but it's really just self-focus. I think that it shouldn't prevent those people or us watching those people from, in a way, realizing that the cure isn't stopping. Maybe you can speak more to this, but in my imagination, in my thought process, it wouldn't be to stop them from doing good things, right? It wouldn't be to cut them off from doing those good things, but it'd be to address the deeper rooted problems. How would you? So you write about narcissism and you contribute to Psychology Today regularly. You have quite a few articles, and for those of you who haven't read the articles, go check out Dr. Strubler's work there, Psychology Today. But you talk a lot about there are at least 3 or 4 posts or more about narcissism there.
Actually, there's 6
6
altogether.
Okay,
There's
total.
a series of 5 called Tangled.
That's it. Yeah.
Tangled: Escaping the Narcissistic or the Tower of Narcissistic Abuse.
So say you have somebody in your life who you feel is a narcissist, right? And they're doing good in your life, but you feel that they might be doing it manipulatively, or maybe to broaden out a little bit. If someone is exhibiting narcissistic tendencies, what are you looking for? How are you addressing the problem? And then how do you solve it?
Yeah, well, narcissism is rampant in our culture. And our culture, this hyper-modern culture, this hyper-individualistic culture, breeds it.
Yeah.
So that's important to understand. In other words, it's like permission to be a narcissist, to be self-centered. And, in fact, in one of my articles, I said, at best, we are all sincere hypocrites. So in other words, to some extent, we're all self-centered. Let's face it.
Totally. Yeah.
We all are. And to some extent, we should be.
Right.
We do need to respect ourselves. We need to care about ourselves and all of that. That's not narcissism.
Okay.
Okay. Self-care and those are not narcissistic tendencies. In fact, it's kind of humorous sometimes because I'll have somebody walk up to me, and, maybe they read my series or something, and they'll say, "Do you think I'm a narcissist?" And I say, "Heavens, no! You're the exact opposite of a narcissist." Yeah. And a lot of times, what it is people that become, and I use the word target on purpose, become targets of narcissists, is that they are empathetic, and many of you listening are empathetic people,
right.
And in fact, Adam Grant in one of his new books, he's a psychologist, and it's called Think Again. But what he talks about is that there's 2 kinds of people in the world. There are those who are combative, and they fight for everything that they want and everything they do, and then there are those of us who are want to get along. We want to encourage. We want to share. We want to, that kind of thing. And he said, and of course, you see sort of a rise in this in our culture. This polarization of people who are on one hand empathetic versus those who are self-centered and combative and toxic and contentious and all those other words. And so what we have now is a hyper-modern society that is breeding, in my opinion, narcissism. And there's different sources for, like, why. I get this every day. Why would somebody act that way? Why would someone be so self-centered, so controlling, so demanding, so abusive? What would make anyone do that? And my answer to them is, well, you're a normal person and you are logical. But a narcissist is a person who is pathological. And the word path means disease. Their logic is diseased. And what's it diseased by? Well, it could be a lot of things. I mean, some narcissists are people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. In other words, they were told that they were, the greatest thing since sliced bread from the time they were small. And so they are just, but typically those people are not mean or violent.
Sure.
They're just self-centered.
Right, right.
And in other words, their favorite topic is them.
Right. So in the case of a person who's doing a lot of positive things in the world selfishly, that's the, yeah, I mean, we, in a sense, everyone is doing everything selfishly, right? We're almost always talking about ourselves when we're talking, right? I can't remember who said that to credit them, but so sorry to interject, but yeah.
Well, the basic idea is that there's different levels of narcissism, and I have levels 1 through 5. There's 5 stories in the Tower of Narcissism, and level 1 is really a passive narcissist in the sense that they're just simply self-centered,
Right.
And what's hard when you're with them is they're not mean,
Right.
But they don't think about you.
Right.
They don't think, and they only talk about themselves, and it's annoying,
Right.
but it's not dangerous or anything like that. And so then we move into what I call the passive aggressive narcissist, and this is someone who it makes the snarky comments, makes passive aggressive comments, like. Well, I use the example in Rapunzel, the story of Tangled.
Right.
And Rapunzel's mother is a narcissist, right? So for those who have seen Tangled, you'll know what I'm talking about. And she makes these snide remarks to her daughter, like, "Oh, you're so cute and so fat. Oh, I'm just kidding." I mean, that's a passive aggressive comment. And so it's aggressive.
Yeah.
But it's passive in the sense. I mean, it's not seriously damaging, but it does hit you,
Sure.
and it affects you, and especially if you have say for example a narcissistic parent like her mother, it affects that person throughout their life. It affects their self-esteem and those sorts of things, because you're always wondering, am I okay? Am I,
Right.
You don't get full approval and
Right.
all that sort of thing.
Sure.
So then we go from passive, so we start with passive, aggressive, then we go to aggressive. Aggressive is the abusive person. Usually at that level, it's verbally abusive. I mean, cut downs, mean comments, and here's a big irony with narcissists. A lot of them have empathy. This is the irony. Because often people say, well, narcissists have no empathy. And the reason they say that is because they treat you, especially the aggressive narcissist, treat you with such derision and, and is so caustic towards you. And so, the way you interpret that, of course, is that they have no empathy. Often what it is they have deep empathy in their background, so they know how to read you emotionally. They know what hurts you, and they go for that.
That's crazy.
And they use terrible language. They go right for the thing that they know that hurts you the most.
Wow.
And often that's verbal. I mean, it can switch over into physical as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. Right. But generally, it's when you get into aggressive. If you're in a relationship with an aggressive narcissist, this is really going to damage you. And so let me just say this right now. You didn't get into this relationship for the purpose of being abused. That's not why you did it. You were probably attracted to the person's qualities. Often narcissists, they could be very physically attractive. They could have talent. They could be, lots of things. And they may be very charismatic. In fact, many, many narcissists are very charismatic. And that's why they have people following them.
You've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, we've all seen it.
Right, yeah.
In fact, we see an abundance of it in our culture now, where these really talented people, highly self-centered, but then they carry it into that next phase of being abusive.
Right.
And so that's level number 3. Level number 4 is what we call the serial, what I call the serial narcissistic abuser. And this is someone who doesn't just do it to one person, but does it to many people. And it is a level above. It usually involves physical violence, typically. They're also called the raging narcissist. And if you've known anyone like this, where everything's going fine, you're just talking, and all of a sudden this person suddenly flies into a rage for no rational reason. Like I threw my shoes back into the car, and the person was sitting on the other side. The narcissist is sitting in the driver's seat, and I throw my shoes in. How dare you? How disrespectful. It makes no sense.
Right.
It's
crazy.
It's completely pathological.
Right.
So when we get to that level, when we get to level 4, you are talking about a dangerous person. You're talking about somebody who's probably going to go into physical violence, hitting, kicking, biting, all these kinds of things, and they fly into rages.
Right.
And then the level 5 is the raging serial narcissistic predator. And this is the highest level. This is the Ted Bundys of the world. These are people who target people. In other words, it's not happenstance. They actually target people that are empathetic. And they go through 4 stages. It's called, the first stage is what I call the evaluation stage. Is Alec going to hit me back? If I say I swat him or something, does he hit me back? It's a little test. Is he going to report me to the police if I hit him with my car or something? And we laugh, but it's not funny if you're on the receiving end of it. That's the thing.
Right.
And so they test to see if you'll report it to others. Okay. If you don't report it, and you're empathetic, and by the way, they targeted you because you were empathetic.
Right.
That's why you got targeted.
Right.
And that's not your fault. Empathy is a gift from God, and you should value it. Just remember that right now we have a large number of narcissists out there, and that are likely to try to take advantage of that.
How many narcissists are there in the world? Are they? Do you have to be diagnosed to be a narcissist, or?
Well, no, obviously not.
Well, right. But like, is the threshold? Do you think it's where it should be for diagnosing narcissism? Maybe.
Well, let's put it this way. I would say that when you're talking about the criminal level,
right,
which is what we're talking about now, so that would be level 4 or 5. We're probably talking somewhere between 5 and 10%, I'll say 5% of the population. And you say, well, I'm glad it's, 95% of us are at least somewhat normal.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
But here's the challenge, and everyone listening to this knows that you have one narcissist at work.
Right.
5% of the workplace, okay? And it only takes one.
Wow.
You know.
That's a big number.
It's actually
a huge
very
number.
large number.
Right.
Out of 330 million Americans.
It's crazy.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's scary.
Divide that by the number of states, and you get a pretty good idea of how many narcissists are in your state. And so it is a large number in that sense. But here's the thing: they're disproportionate to their number. I know one case where there was a narcissist. First of all, there was a narcissist boss. And this was in a manufacturing facility. And this narcissist boss actually punched people. And he walked right up to them. And,
how do you get away with that?
Well, the way you get away with it, see, this is what narcissists are so good at. They're so good at getting away with their abuse because they know that the worker is new. They haven't passed their probation yet. They need a job. They can't afford not to have a job. And so they start out usually, and they test them. They test them to
Right.
see if they fight back.
Sure.
You know, and so they'll play them. They might use passive aggressive comments, and then they might move to aggressive comments, and then they might move to
So it's like a frog. It's like a frog boiling water
yes,
kind of thing. Yeah.
just do it
It's
slowly.
a slow rise.
Yeah, and so a lot of this it's actually it's ironically called the love bombing stage, where in the first stage they're really nice to you, almost too nice,
Right.
and you think,
Oh, this water is comfortable.
right,
Yeah, this is
exactly,
nice.
and say you're a new employee,
Yeah.
and wow, this boss is really nice to me
Right.
and everything, and then all of a sudden, once I'm kind of hooked and I'm in, then we see a little bit of abuse coming.
Right.
Smaller and then larger and then larger and then larger.
The floor is kind of warm down there.
It's really warm, and then the punching starts and kicking and hitting and threats. A lot of threats. I don't know. I might just fire you tomorrow. That kind of thing. And so what happens is people get away with this for an unusually long period of time in the workplace because they are really good at playing people differently. So the way they talk to the bosses themselves, say a manager who's abusive, the way he or she talks to his or her boss will be very different than the way he or she is treating employees. So they cover it up. They cover it really well. And they're really good at being deceitful about it and covering it up. And so the love bombing stage happens. That's followed by abuse, as I described. And then after abuse comes discard. I throw you away. So it could be a parent disowning a child. It could be a boss firing an employee. It could be boyfriend, girlfriend. I'm done with you. I'm dumping you. And suddenly, I'm done. And of course, obviously, that has a tremendous impact, on anyone who is rejected for any reason in any situation. And then here's the irony. Often, not always, but often, there's the fourth stage is called hoovering, like the vacuum, hoovering.
Right.
And it's to vacuum you back into the relationship. And so serial narcissists, especially serial narcissists, want their victims to come back so they can control them. And they're very much driven by control, the power over others. And they actually get, they enjoy hurting. It gives them an adrenaline rush that excites them.
Right.
And then you say, and I know you're going to ask it, so I might as well just say it. Why does someone stay in the relationship? Why do they get hoovered back in? Why does the boyfriend or girlfriend get hoovered back into an old relationship that was abusive? Why?
Sure.
Why does somebody go back to a workplace, where they were abused? Why, and that sort of thing. And the answer is it's addiction. When you've been love bombed, you've been caught up in the whole thing. Like, for example, in a romantic relationship, a common approach during the love bombing phase is, you're my soulmate. You're the only person ever that I ever felt this way. And it's always over the top. And if I may say this, over the top sexually, over the top emotionally, and the person gets hooked in. Once they're hooked, then the abuse starts. Now, this is an interesting dynamic because you would think that the abuse would start and people would leave, but they don't. Partly because they're empathetic and they're thinking, gosh, I must have done something. And that's the gaslighting part of
All
that.
right.
Where the narcissist is making you believe that you're the problem.
Right.
I wouldn't have had to hit you if you had been a better boyfriend, if you had been a better girlfriend. I wouldn't have had, or a better employee, or a better son or daughter. So that's called gaslighting. And so the idea is, in effect, sort of a mind control
Right.
in a way, an
Right.
emotion control. And once a person's caught into that, it's very difficult to get out of. It's not impossible, and you must get out of it.
Right.
And again, let me just restate this. If you're in a narcissistic relationship with anyone, I don't care who it is, it's not your fault. You did not go into that relationship for the purpose of being abused and everything else. And no, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just a perfectly normal, empathetic person. But the problem is once you're in it and you're hooked, it takes a great deal of effort to get out of it. And I want to just say this. Empathetic people think they can fix people. And I want to say, that's not one of your talents. You can't fix a narcissist. So let's just say the reason the narcissist is a narcissist is because as a child they were abused, let's say.
Right.
And by the way, that's common, that they were abused as a child.
Sure.
By who knows. And so their reaction to that is to want to be in control. So they make a pattern of being contentious, raging, controlling, dominating, and preying on others. If it goes to an extreme level.
Right.
And so that's the reason often.
Right.
And so the empathetic person says, oh, well, they're doing it because I wasn't as good of a boyfriend or girlfriend or
Right.
employee as I should have been, and because they have a tough background. And see, we assume that that's true, and it probably is. So in fairness, I'm going to say both and.
Sure.
It is true that most narcissists probably somewhere in their background have been abused, and this is their reaction to it.
Right.
It's also true that you can't fix it.
Wow.
You cannot.
Wow.
In fact, if you are in a relationship with them, you are in the least likely position to fix it because you're caught up in it. Now, a narcissist could could recognize what they're doing and make a decision to change and go get real help.
Yeah.
But one of the games of the narcissist is, and this is a good sign, is when you go out on your first date or you have your first meeting with the boss or whoever it is, and they tell you their sob story. That is a telltale sign.
Interesting.
Because if somebody is telling you, you don't even know them yet, first date or first day at work, and the boss comes to you and, oh, it's so hard around here, the way I get treated, and it's just not fair, and all this kind of stuff. That is a common technique of narcissists to pull you in and to test you to see if you're empathetic. And if you pass the empathy test, then they'll go, okay, I've got one that I can play, and I can dominate this person. So how do you stay out of that? Well, the way you stay out of that is as soon as somebody goes towards, for example, telling you their sob story, you could say, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I know a lot of people, have been through similar things, but I'm confident in your ability to solve that. And or change the subject or whatever.
Right.
But if they keep
empowering them instead of
empowering them,
creating an unhealthy
that's
relationship.
An appropriate response
Yeah.
from a mature adult.
Right.
To respond that way, but they don't want that.
Right.
They want you to empathize with them
Right.
so that they can pull you in.
Right.
And so I often tell people is you're not a victim, but you were a target. Now, whether you're a victim or not is a choice you have to make.
Sure.
And usually, not always, usually the only way out of it is to leave completely. And then go live and become your best self, independent of them. And it's hard to do because they will keep trying to come back. And in some cases, especially at level 4 and 5, you probably will have to call the police. You probably will have to get help from family and friends. Because once somebody is abusing you especially if it's physical and emotional
Right.
abuse, the only way out of it is usually to get help.
Right.
But you must leave the circumstance. And
It reminds me that Harriet Breaker, I think, is the author. Have you read or heard of Who's Pulling Your Strings?
no, I don't know that one.
It's about manipulation, and there's an analogy. Actually, there's a study done in the. It was talked about in the book. It's a birdcage study, where the bird is given a treat each time it ticks this little bar, and they let it continuously hit that bar and get a treat for a series of days, so that it learns, when I hit this bar, get the treat. And after a while, they take the treat away, and give him a treat sporadically. So he'll hit the bar, he'll get a treat. Hit the bar again, treat. Hit the bar again, no treat.
No treat.
Hit the bar again, no treat.
Sure.
Right, and so the
Pavlov's dog and all that. Yeah.
right, and so they just sporadically give this bird the treat. Well, they eventually just pull the treat away completely, and the bird continues to hit the bar. Nothing comes out. Well, you'd think that the bird eventually would relearn not to hit the bar, but it doesn't.
Right.
The bird dies
Right.
of exhaustion from hitting the bar over and over and over again.
Exactly. And that's what happens to people.
Yeah.
Is that they experience exhaustion in a relationship with a narcissist, and that's why it's so difficult. So you do have to relearn, but that's why I say you need some help to do it.
Right.
If you are in a relationship with a
Yeah.
narcissist, if you're at work, you need to report it to human resources, where I used to work, and I've had a lot of people come in and talk to me about abuse from employers and that sort of thing, and I've had to deal with those issues.
What do you say to those people? Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, the first thing is, and you need to know this about the workplace. I mean, before I was a professor, I was a professional. I worked in industry, and I worked in human resources in industry, and so it is absolutely the law that if you come in and you quietly and appropriately say that someone is abusing you, and you have some evidence of it, the employer has to investigate it. They don't have any choice. It's law.
Right.
That they have to investigate it.
Right.
And but you have to be careful about it, because I know in one case where it was also in a manufacturing plant, and it was the narcissist was not the boss. The narcissist was two workers who were ganging up on a third worker and controlling them, manipulating them, and abusing them. And so the person came to me and said, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "Well, you here's the first step. You came to me, and I will investigate this." And eventually, usually what happens is the narcissist eventually gets caught. But it's so painful. I mean, it could take a year or two. If, say, for example, the worker is maybe a long-time worker there, maybe even good at their work. Or maybe they're bad at their work, but they're, say, in the union. And so, they're not easily dismissed.
Right.
And so you have to go through a difficult process of breaking free of the narcissist. And this can be very difficult. But it's necessary, because if you want to get your life back, whether it's at work or in a romantic relationship or even with a parent. And one of the articles I wrote about was a woman named Beth, and I think it's called Bipolar Narcissist MD. I think is the name of the article in not Christianity Today, Psychology Today.
Right.
And
two different
magazines. Probably will end up writing for both.
Right.
But in Psychology Today, it's called Bipolar Narcissist MD. Well, anyway, what happened was the Beth's father is a narcissist and also bipolar. Wow, double whammy, growing up with a bipolar narcissist.
Oh my gosh.
So
What a life for her.
abusive as a narcissist, but then also has a disease, I mean a true disease, psychological disease, of bipolar disorder. And so what happens is, it's like the sucker punch. You know it's coming, but you don't know when it's coming. Okay, why does the bird not leave? Why does the child not leave? Why does the lover not leave? And it's called trauma bonding. So if I hit you, if I got you hooked, and then I hit you, you'll be stunned, and then all of a sudden I'll be nice to you.
Right.
I'll apologize. And I'll beg your forgiveness, and I'll never do it again. But I wouldn't have hit you if you had been a better whatever. Okay, it's called trauma bonding. So think about it from a physiological point of view. I'm originally a biologist, and so when you think about the release of adrenaline and dopamine, so somebody hits you, of course, adrenaline kicks in, high state of fight or flight. Okay, and then all of a sudden the person turns around and loves you or pretends to love you. Dopamine is released. So you go from what you get used to is the adrenaline dopamine combination, and you get addicted
The
to
1-2
that
punch.
because you know that once you get punched, something better's coming. And this is actually biology.
That's crazy.
And we're made this way. We were designed this way, but we weren't designed for this purpose to be abused. That wasn't the point.
Right.
And so what narcissists do is they take advantage of our empathy, but also our biology to keep us in the relationship. And that's why, why doesn't somebody leave the relationship? Well, because they're hooked. They are. And they'll need help probably getting out of it in most cases. So this is a tough subject.
Yeah, it's
but
heavy.
It's common. And
Yeah.
it's common because we see hyper-individualism rampant everywhere. It's being fed, it's being encouraged, it's being allowed, it's being rewarded. And then those that are maybe on that fringe and that 5%
Right.
get rewarded by society
Sure.
for behaving this way.
Right.
And so they do. They do it because they can.
Those reward systems, what do you think they are? Like built into modern society?
Well, I think first of all, it's even more base than that. It goes back to the bird you talked about.
Yeah.
Why does the bird not, do something about it? Well, because its biology is designed that way.
Yeah.
To follow the reward. It's called behaviorism, is what it's called. And so we are literally designed that way. So if somebody in society takes advantage of it, and then it becomes a reward for them. I gaslighted that person, and I got them to do what I wanted. That's a reward.
Right.
See, so the rewards are also built into the narcissist.
Right.
Because the narcissist is getting rewarded. They get a high from hitting you.
Right.
They get adrenaline rush.
And technology must be feeding into this as well.
Yes.
Being that, I read somewhere that the more self-involved the artist generally is associated with greater income or success or more fame or notoriety. That if you're a successful artist, that you're also a probably at least some degree of an egotist. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be if you're a successful artist.
You don't have to be, no.
But it benefits you to, one, just be good at self-promotion. And, if you like self-promotion, which, I don't know, is that a narcissistic tendency?
Addictive. It can
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Self-promotion can become
Sure.
very addictive. I mean, we see it on Facebook all the time.
Sure.
You're looking for the likes. You're looking
Right.
for, why do you keep going back?
Right.
Yeah. And then
You see
and
the
then-
bird
and then you
hitting
go,
that
you
bar.
go back to your Facebook today, and nobody hit like on anything. So what do? You put up another post. Seriously.
Where's my treat?
Where's my treat? And so you put up another post, and then you get likes, and
Right.
that feeds you.
Yeah.
And once you're fed, I mean, what do you think? What do you think social media is all about?
Right.
It's based on that same biology, and it's understood.
Right.
And yes, organizations take advantage of it. They
Yeah.
do, as well as individuals.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole nother topic.
Right. Yeah.
About
Wow.
organizations,
Yeah.
but
So what's the best thing for people that feel like they're caught in a web themselves of maybe narcissistic tendencies, or they're just analyzing themselves right now listening to this, like I am going, am I starting to like self-promotion? Like personally, I talk to my close family and friends, and I've always been bad and had to push myself to self-promotion. But it's only until I've pushed myself and started sharing my work and realizing that there's a difference between selfishly doing that and showing up because you want people to be a part, you personally want to be a part of something larger than yourself.
right.
You have to show up to play the game, right? So if you're an artist and you're not showing your work to other people, then you're actually doing a major disservice to them. And Stephen Pressfield talks about in the art of the War of Art that really you're actually doing a disservice to people by not sharing your work. So there's a healthy end to this, but if you're somebody who's concerned that maybe you're not psychologically sound enough to be posting on Facebook all the time, or maybe you're self-involved, or we're probably all more selfish than we should be, but it's like, what becomes then the best? Is it to get rid of the media outlets? Is it to, is it to try and self-evaluate, to seek counseling? And I'm sure that's a big part of healing for people that have serious problems with narcissism, maybe level 2 or 3.
Well, it depends on if you're talking about the narcissist or the person on the receiving end of the narcissism.
Right.
But either way.
Right. Do narcissists? Well, let me pose it this way. Sorry to interrupt you, but do narcissists know that they're narcissists?
It's a fair question, and I've been asked many times that. The answer is sometimes.
Wow. So you can be one and not know it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can be completely
That doesn't scare you.
self-unaware.
Right.
And that and here's why.
Sure.
Because your pathologic tells you that what you're doing is logical, that it's good, that it's right, that it benefits you. And that's the challenge. If someone has, especially if they're at level 3 through 5, that you're talking pathological there. And as soon as you cross into those areas, then it's all about feeding that. And it makes sense to you. It seems right to you. Right. And you believe that you're right.
Right.
And that you're doing the right thing.
There's a rationality behind it.
And there's a rationale behind it. Well, of course.
Yeah.
So this is a real challenge for all of us. So how do we then live? That's the question. The answer is both and. So let's just, you could use Facebook as an example. Yeah. Say I'm wondering, am I spending too much time? Well, observe your time.
Right. Right.
And if you find yourself checking your Facebook or your Instagram, or I don't know, whatever it is you're using, 5, 6, 7 times an hour.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself sitting there for hours scrolling.
Right.
It's a value question too. Do you want to spend your time this way? Could you spend your time and your energy in better ways? So a disciplined person is going to say, well, what I'm going to do is when I'm in a meeting, I'm putting my phone away. I'm going to turn off my phone and I'm going to put it out of sight. And when I'm having dinner with my family, I'm going to take my phone and I'm going to set it where I can't hear it, not even buzz.
Right.
Because I'm going to focus on my family while I'm doing that.
Yeah.
In other words, it comes down to disciplines, because we can become addicted to anything. Human beings, because of the biology I just described, we literally can become addicted to just about anything. So we have to discipline ourselves and choose to do that. Now, if we cannot discipline ourselves, if we cannot get out of a narcissistic relationship, if we are at least aware enough that we're narcissists and we don't want to be, then yes, go get help.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And there's lots of counselors and people available, pastors, counselors, all kinds of people available
Right.
to help. But I would say anytime you're dealing with any kind of addiction, it's only about 1 in 500 people who can completely on their own end an addiction.
Wow.
If it's, I mean, assuming it's a fairly strong one.
Right.
You know, whether it's cigarette smoking or drugs or alcohol or whatever it is you're
Right.
dealing with, it's a rare person. I'm not saying it
Right.
can't be done.
Sure.
I know people who have done it.
Right.
But it's hard. It's really hard. And if you're not successful, I mean, try it on your own. But if you can't break away from whatever the addiction is on your own in a fairly short period of time, it means you need to go get help. And because in other words, if you try to set disciplines for yourself, food, another addiction. Food is a huge addiction in our society. And it's a dopamine high. Every time you stuff that particular kind of food down,
Yeah.
it's a dopamine high for you.
Right.
You may need to get help
Right.
to break that addiction. And I've had many friends who have dealt with food addictions, alcohol addictions, sexual addictions, all kinds of. Sex is probably one of the most powerful
Sure.
addictions there is.
Right.
So all of these probably will require getting some help.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing, though, I'm going to come back to interdependence.
Yeah.
The opposite of sobriety, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connectedness. And I apologize, I can't remember the name of the famous psychologist who said this recently. Look it up. But this is important. Think about it. If I am addicted to anything, I don't care what it is, and I need to break it, and I know I need to break it, the answer is to become connected. So in my own life, I have certain disciplines. For example, 3 times a week, I meet with different men's groups. And they're all 3 different. They're different ages. I have one group that are your age, and say in their 20s, mid to late 20s, early 30s. I'm involved with another group of men in their 50s, and another group that are closer to my age, over 60. And I, with very few exceptions, miss those meetings. Why do I do that? Well, the reason I do that is it keeps me grounded. Each week, and each group is different, and they have a different topic that they talk about, but we can pretty much talk about anything. And so I'm building close relationships. I'm being connected, and anybody in the group can talk. They can even talk openly about their addictions. Now, these are not, ironically, these are not, what's it called, like a 12-step program. That's not what this is. This is not a program.
Right.
These are simply friends that I have met here, there, and other places. And I reach out to people, I do, because I know I need it.
Right.
I know that I need connectedness. So the one group in particular, there were 3 of us. We all shared a common situation. So I said, well, why don't we start meeting? And they said, yeah, let's do that. And we met this morning. So also, I have a mentor, Dr. Lauren Siffring.
Right.
Dr. Siffring was my medical doctor when I was a child. And then when I was about 19 years old, he gave me my first physical exam to go out to the Colorado Outward Bound School. I'm a graduate of 4 mountaineering schools. And I got to know him. He said, well, I'm from Colorado, and I was going to climb in Colorado. And so we kind of became friends, even though he was my doctor. And then about 4 or 5 years later, I got a letter from him, just out of the blue, and he said, I'm leaving medicine to become a pastor. I thought, wow, I've never heard of anyone doing that. So I was going through a transition in my 20s, as we often do, by the way, those of you who are in your 20s. I call them the tumultuous 20s, just so you know.
Right.
And so if it's tumultuous, that means you're normal, okay?
Right.
Really important to know that. You're not weird. That's normal. And so I was going through one of my tumultuous 20 times, and I thought of him because he wrote me a letter. And I came down and down to Rochester, Michigan here, and I said, I'm getting ready to climb Denali, the highest mountain in North America. Used to be called Mount McKinley. And would you be willing to meet with me and train me in the medicine that I have to know how to do when I'm on the mountain? And he said, sure. So I went to somebody who had been kind to me, somebody who had reached out to me first,
Right.
and asked him to be my mentor. We've been meeting every Monday morning for 40 years.
It's awesome.
Connectedness is the opposite of addiction.
Right.
So if you're suffering from any kind of addiction,
Right.
the first thing you want to do is you want to get connected.
Right.
It could be in a women's group, a men's group,
Right.
or even a mixed group, depending on what it is you're trying to deal with.
Sure.
And it is, I would say, in fact, I'm going to say what I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
The number one health factor ever, above all things and everything else, is to be connected.
So good. And it reminds me of, a couple of things. So if someone's struggling with serious addiction, they should probably seek counsel, professional counsel and service, and build in, secondarily, as you say, relationships with people, and become connected with people who struggle with the same things they do, people who share the same, maybe jobs or similar stress levels, or people who they can relate to. And that's chief to their emotional and even physical health. But I like you said something interesting too. And this probably applies more to people who have addictive tendencies towards certain things like social media, or maybe certain foods, or spending their time doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing. You mentioned monitoring your time, or kind of monitoring or figuring out where your time is going.
Right.
That it's like Peter Drucker. The effective
guru.
The Effective Executive. I read that book, and of course, a few friends of mine laughed at me because, why are you reading a book about being an executive? You're you're a full-time artist. Like, where's your head now? And I read it because I'd heard it was a great book for people struggling to time manage. And what he says, which is interesting, is that time management isn't the issue. It's not that you're bad at managing your time, or even bad at planning correctly. It's actually bad. It's actually that you're bad at tracking your time allocation. And when you track your time, when you start to allocate time, observe time, not the opposite of allocate time, you actually make changes in observation. So I noticed I got this app, which, for those of you who haven't seen the app, it's Timular, or are interested in it, Timeullar. That's a great one. You can create categories and subcategories, and click on the category, and it automatically starts time, and then of course hit it again to cancel it. But I for about 3 weeks, per Peter's recommendation, tracked my time, everything I did, down to brushing my teeth, and put it in a category. And it was a temporary measure to find out where my time was going. And what I found so helpful about that is each time I'd switch from one task to another, I became self-aware and present in the moment of what I was doing. And that action of saying, okay, now I'm going on social media, oh crap, I have to track this, it made me second guess my decisions. So just the analysis. So recommend to people out there, for just a brief period of time, it doesn't mean that you have to be a crazy,
No.
like constantly tracking every minute of your day for the rest of your life, but just keep some sort of metric for a short period of time, some way of monitoring where your time goes. That might be helpful for people struggling with addictions such as Facebook, or probably less Facebook now and more TikTok, right?
TikTok, right.
Because
Sorry.
the times
I'm
are
an older
changing.
guy, so.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I still use Facebook. It's a great tool, but yeah, it's it could be gone by the time this reaches the ears of many folks. So anyway, pointing back to our conversation, what is a book that you would recommend on the topics of, or maybe articles, or definitely folks check out your published work for Psychology Today. Are there any books that you might recommend? And then also just what book would you give somebody if you met them for the first time and they asked you what your favorite book was, or most impactful book on your life?
Well, it changes, because I'm reading I have 3 books on my nightstand right now.
Yeah.
One is by Thomas Merton.
Oh yeah.
Called Contemplations.
Ooh.
And it's a fascinating book because it's easy to read, it's straightforward, but he takes you into, especially if you're an artist, he takes you into a different world. And he takes you into the world of contemplation and says contemplation is a good thing, not a bad thing. That is, we contemplate, we think about ourselves, our place in the world, our purpose, why we're here, these kinds of things. And getting back to your point about time, we allot a certain amount of time to that. And he actually advocates for that. Because he said there's different kinds of isolation. So, for example, there's good isolation. Good isolation where you take time to yourself. And especially if you're an introverted person, you must do this.
Right.
I hope if you're introverted, please do this. And where you take time to just relax and contemplate and think about your life and where it's going and all that sort of thing. Now, where that can become dangerous, of course, and so that's a good kind of isolation. Where it's a bad kind of isolation is if I'm alone and I don't want to be alone and I'm lonely and I start ruminating and thinking over and over and over and over again about what I said or what I did or what I didn't do, or self-loathing. That's a common challenge that a lot of people feel. They hate themselves, and they feel ashamed, or they feel guilty, or whatever the case might be. That's not a good kind of ruminating. That's not a good use of time. So if you're a person that's in that mind space, then you want to definitely get connected. Now, if you're introverted, you want to get connected on a one-on-one basis. You're not going to be great in a crowd. In fact, it'll cause you anxiety if you do it. And I'm an extrovert, but everyone in my family are introverts. So I'm outnumbered 4-1, and so the point is that you need to know, who you are, what your person is. It really comes back to the essence of identity.
Yeah.
Who am I? Who am I in my relationship with God? Who am I in my relationship with others? Boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, family, friends, all of that. Who am I? And maybe a better question is, whose am I? That's connectedness. When I can say clearly, I know whose I am, then that can tell us who we are.
And that's good. That sort of reminds me of something that you've said to me before, and I've held on to it and said it to many others, is that you are the sum total of all that you're committed to,
Yes.
or the people that you're committed to. And if you realize that your commitment is to a group of people, your life then becomes, in a sense, a performance for those people. And the stuff that you get from them is what you end up giving to other people.
Sure, yeah, because you're receiving. You're in a position to receive.
Right.
When we're isolated, when we don't have those relationships, then we feel alone, and then we try to stay alone,
Right.
to avoid the pain.
Right.
That's not helpful, and that may be a point where each of us might need some help
Yeah.
to break out of that. But I can say this is that, and right now during COVID, a lot of shelter down going on.
Right.
The elderly in particular are suffering badly from being sheltered down. They're being protected from the disease. That's good, of course. At the same time, if they're disconnected, the number one health factor is connectedness. So we're starting to see right now in nursing homes and in independent living places for the elderly, a lot of that. But it's not just the elderly. I would say the 20-somethings, that group, are experiencing a high degree of isolation.
Totally.
Yeah, really high. And it's been made worse by COVID.
Right.
People who are afraid constantly of being connected. What I did, by the way, besides having the discipline of having meetings, I usually have 5 or 6 a week with groups or individuals. That keeps me grounded. Right. But each day I also have disciplines, and then during certain times. So when COVID hit, for example, my first course, I'm an extrovert. Yeah. My first thing I did was I made a list of about 30 friends and family members that I had not been in contact with for, in some cases, for years. Wow. And I started calling them. I call like 1 or 2 a day, usually 1 a day. That's cool. Because they are long conversations. And I talked to a friend of mine who I met when I was 4. Okay. And I'm 68.
You've reached way back there.
That's 64 years ago we met. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time. We talked for 3 hours. And so what I did, my response to COVID was dig in. Remind myself of who and whose I am. These people that I called were people that contributed to my life in some significant way at some point. And I went back and regrounded myself with them. Also, when, of course, COVID hit in March, I guess it was, so as soon as the weather broke, I mean, I go outside in the freezing cold. It doesn't matter to me, but I can't always get people to go with me. But then as soon as the weather broke, I went outside, and I bet 5 times a week, I went on a walk with a different friend or family member. And we, did our social distancing and all that. But we stayed connected. Yeah. Now, I had to work hard at that. That was a discipline. Even though it's easier for me than for our introverts. Right. But it was so necessary. Yeah. And because we couldn't meet in large groups, and we still really can't very well. So it's important for us to be deliberate, to be intentional about our lives. And I just want to say this to everyone. You do have a purpose. You were created for a purpose. It's your responsibility to find out what that is. But I can guarantee you, and I got a call this week, a friend called me, and he's retired, and he said, I don't know what my purpose is anymore. And I said, well, I guarantee that you have one. And then we talked about different ways for him to go out and rediscover his new purpose, because he was going through a transition, from being retired into from being working into retirement. Right. But see, at every age we're going through transitions. Right. We go from single to married, married to having kids, and unfortunately sometimes divorced. Sure. These are all transitions that people go through. Right. They have to be very deliberate about being connected, knowing who and whose they are, and they have to do it constantly, and you will have to do this for the rest of your life, because that's the meaning of life. Yeah. Is being connected. Yeah. That is your purpose. Now, for each one of us, who we're connected with, of course, is different. But that's okay. So that's my challenge to everyone, is whether you're introvert or extrovert, find out who you are, find out who's you're connected to, find out what your purpose is, be led by the purpose, And one piece of advice I have too for those of you who are real high energy and high achievers, don't be purpose driven, be purpose led. There's a huge difference. I mentioned that earlier in our talk, but
talk about that difference.
there's a big difference. And I'll just confess one of my biggest failures was that I at one point in my life, it was like I sort of woke up. You know, when you hit for women about 24, 25, men about 28 or so.
Yeah.
Your brain develops, okay?
Right.
The executive function of your brain takes over, and you can actually start to think about things.
Right.
You can think about the future. You can plan. You can commit. You can do all kinds of things. It's a wonderful gift.
Right.
And so what happened is when that kicked in, I all of a sudden discovered what my purpose in life was. Well, the problem is then I took over. And I said, okay, thanks God for telling me what my purpose is. I've got it from here. And so what I did is I just took off. And I'm serious. There was one point where I was working one of my first jobs. I was running an outward bound adaptive program for kids up in northern Michigan. And I'm not exaggerating at all. I averaged 90 hours a week of work for one whole year.
Oh my gosh.
90, that was my average. There were some weeks where I went over 90 hours. I hardly ever slept. I was driven by my purpose. I'll just come right out and say it. That's stupid. Okay? It's just plain stupid. And, I started having physical, backaches and all kinds of things. And I burnt out.
Right.
Now, there's a difference between burnout and breakdown. I didn't have a nervous breakdown, but I burnt out to this point. I had to quit the job I was in, and I couldn't work for 4 months. So what I did is I bought a bicycle, and I sold my car, and I also bought a camera, and I took off to ride around the United States, the circumference. Well, I made it all the way to Vermont. Okay, so about 1,000 miles. But I was so driven. The first day when I went out, I rode 100 miles the first day. Now, I was an athlete at the time, but I was not a bicycler. And I wrecked my knee the first day out. And for the next 9 days, I put a wrap around my knee, and I rode that bicycle until I got to Vermont. And I had to stop because my leg was in such bad shape. So I became a logger. I actually got a job logging in the mountains.
I did not know this about you.
Oh, yeah. And I'm out there. And so I did that for about a month. And I thought, well, winter's coming. It was heading into October, November. So I knew I would have to go south, because I went east over to Vermont from Michigan, and then I had to head south. So I took off, and I headed south, and I went over to Massachusetts, stopped to see my uncle, and I realized the first day out, my knee was shot, and it wasn't going to get fixed. And I always tell people, God apprehended me. He stopped me and saved me from myself because I was so driven. So to answer your question, having a purpose is incredibly important.
Right.
Being purpose-driven is stupid.
Right.
Don't do it. Be led by your purpose and ask yourself, okay, this is my purpose today. This is my purpose. What do I need to do today?
Right.
What do I need to do this week? Manage our time and all that.
Right.
That moves me towards the purpose. And here's the other thing. Let's say somebody comes along and says, Alec, you're great at this and this and this. Why don't you join me in, I'm going to go do this. How about joining me? You'd be perfect for it. The first question you got to ask yourself is this consistent with the purpose to which I'm called?
Right.
If it's not, then you just kindly say no. I'm really excited for you. That's great. Right. But it's not really what I'm called to. But thank you for thinking of me.
Right.
And so you're kind about it, you're civil about it, but you say no.
Right.
That's called assertiveness. And it's a skill that especially empathetic people need to have.
Yeah.
They need to learn how to say no in their very kind way, but
Right.
say it very clearly.
Right.
And that will help empathetic people, by the way.
Right.
And about 50% of you listening are empathetic. So,
Right.
so I figure I got at least a 50% chance of reaching you.
No doubt. I have a few kind of call them quick draw questions. And they don't have to be quick responses, but I will start with what pisses you off?
Wow. Well, I am generally a pretty self-controlled person.
Right.
So I think that most of the time, and of course when you work in human resources,
Yeah.
you have to be.
Right.
You have to. That's one thing for any of you who might want a career in human resources. The first requirement is you always have to act like a grown-up. Even if the employees and even if your boss isn't,
Right.
your job is to stay level. So I got trained in that, and I got good at it. So I wouldn't allow things, as you put it, to piss me off.
Right.
Because my boss said, and he was great, one of the best bosses I ever had. He said, "Now, Dave, if you're going to work in labor relations, you're going to be working with pretty contentious situations.
Right.
You're working with the unions and all this stuff." So he said, "Here's the rule." He said, I make it my goal and my way of thinking that I will never, ever, ever take anything personally." And then he said, "Unless it's to my advantage to do so." and so the thing is we want to be careful. And for people that are fairly self-controlled most of the time, they can blow up and they can get angry because somebody keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. So what I try to do is manage it as I go. When I see someone acting like a narcissist, for example, and that wouldn't, to put it again in your terms, would piss me off.
Right.
What I would do is I would handle the narcissist, I would manage the narcissist, and not allow them to cross over.
Right. So don't let people piss you off.
Right. So there was a situation where one time I heard someone talking to someone else that I knew well, and I could hear them talking. And they were trying to convince them to do something that they didn't want to do. And the person that was listening was an empathetic person. The person who was talking, was a pusher. Let's just call it that.
Right.
And so what I did is I just stood up and I walked over to where they were having their conversation. And I said very kindly, calmly, level, totally level, I know that you mean well. I do. I know that you mean well. Here's the thing. This is a decision that this person has to make. And they can't do what I want them to do. They can't do what you want them to do. They need to ask God and decide what their purpose is. And does the thing we're talking about, does it present itself? Does it fit into that purpose? And so I kept it really level, even though the person was practically yelling,
Right.
At the other person.
Oh my gosh.
So I intervened, and what I was trying to do was teach the person who was on the receiving end of this how to be assertive without being aggressive.
That's good.
Or passive aggressive. Or worse, passive. Because that's what was happening, is the person was being passive.
Right.
And they needed to be assertive.
Yeah.
So this is a skill that anyone can learn how to do. There are classes in it. Take one.
That's great. What is your favorite pizza topping?
Well, one that I really, I'll say it, I love mushrooms. I just do. I love mushrooms. And, pepperoni's okay and all that stuff. but I think mushrooms are the bee's knees.
Come on, I'm
No,
with you.
they're awesome.
I love mushrooms.
Mushrooms are awesome, and they should be on just about every kind of food there is.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mushroom ice cream, 2022.
Yeah, right. Hadn't thought of that one.
Alec and Dave's mushroom ice cream coming to a store near you. What is a belief that you hold that not many people hold?
Well, as a college professor, and now I'm a college professor. Before, remember, I was a human resource manager
Right.
for many years.
Amongst many other things.
And other things, too. But I think the thing that shocks some people, and I've made a film about this, it's called Making Makers, is the name of the film. In fact, anybody who's interested in seeing it, if you go to the Oakland County Workforce Development website, and you go to apprenticeships, just click on that button, apprenticeships, you'll see the film Making Makers right at the top of the screen. And I made the film because what I saw was that people were being told that they should go to college, that everybody, and I would even hear that, everybody should go to college, everybody should go to college. And I heard it my whole life myself. I did. And then I started to realize, as I mentioned earlier, that if only 40% of people are getting bachelor's degrees and 60% aren't, shouldn't that tell us something? That not everybody should go to college. And what I want to say, especially to those of you who are artists, or you work in the trades, or in manufacturing, or whatever, medical, whatever field you're in, be proud of that, and be the best you can be at that, and learn, keep learning, whether you learn by on the job, or whether you take classes, or you take an assertiveness class,
Right.
whatever it is you do, to do an apprenticeship. There are 60 apprenticeships in Southeast Michigan where we happen to live. 60.
Wow.
20 of them are in the construction field. And they're in all different areas. So what I say to people is, do this. First of all, consider whether college is for you or not. And if it's not, do not waste a minute spending any more time thinking about it. Pursue the thing that you love, that you're good at, and that the world needs. Because it's got to be all three.
Right.
You have to be good at it. And by the way, you don't have to be great at it,
Right.
to make a living at it.
Right.
There's a lot of us who do jobs that we're good at, but we're not, concert violinists like I'm married to.
Right.
I could never be one. I'm a jack of all trades. I'm master of none. I'm not exceptional at anything. I'm not. I'm good at things where I've applied myself and I've worked hard at. And mostly didn't go to college for, by the way.
Right.
And I built a lot of things. Besides the tiny house, I built a log cabin with with a friend of mine. We built it without any power tools, just to see if we could do it. It was fun, and I lived in it too, and skied to work every day.
Of course. Well, of course.
Right, of course. I mean, you'd have to
If
do
you
that.
did build a cabin without power tools, you'd ski to
You'd
work.
have to ski to work because
Right.
the only way to get
That'd be the only relevant way.
and but my point is this: is that I know that many people are still telling their kids, and I'm talking about teachers, parents, and counselors, and even to some extent employers. They're telling all their employees or whatever, you got to go to college, you got to go to college, you got to go to college.
Right.
I agree that everybody needs to learn. That you cannot not learn. Really, if you think about it,
Sure.
unless you're really trying hard.
Right.
Because when you're in the job and a workforce, you're going to learn.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
Right.
So however you learn best, don't let anyone put you down. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough because you didn't do this or you didn't do that.
Right.
What I say is find out what you're good at. Find out what's meaningful to you. And it doesn't have to be your number one passion. Artists, for example, only about 1 to 5% of artists can make a full-time living at art.
Right.
Should they do art? Yes, of course they should. And they need to have another skill.
Yep.
And so I've seen a common thing I'm seeing now is, especially in the millennial generation, they're very entrepreneurial. And so they end up doing 2 or 3 things. So they might do their art and they're full out at it. They give their all to it. And at the same time, they have a day job
Right.
that they're good at.
Right.
Not that they're, top expert at or
Sure.
anything like that. It's not like they want to do this for the rest of their lives, or it's not like something that's their passion.
Right.
But they're good at it.
Right.
And they can make a living at it.
Right.
And then so they might do an art, and they might do a job, and then they might do another business of some kind.
Right.
It could be anything, where they sell stuff online, or they create new products, or here's a better one: integrate all of them into one.
Yeah.
And I think that's really I've seen quite a few young people do that. I think you're doing that right now, where you're integrating your interests into, you're obviously an artist on one hand, and also a business person, and you've taken some business courses because
Sure.
you want to know how to do business.
Sure.
You're doing podcasts now. You're also doing educational programs in your field of the art.
Right.
And another good example of this is Dave Bennett, the great jazz star from Waterford, Michigan. And Dave, interestingly, actually studied accounting, of all things. But he is a great jazz artist. And what he did is he took his knowledge of business and runs his wonderful art, but he knows how to turn it into a profitable business so that he can actually make a living at it.
Right.
So, but a lot of artists don't have that. They don't have that business acumen. So that might mean that you need a good day job, and then you need to do your art.
For sure.
And because probably again, only 1 to 5% of people will make a full-time living at the arts.
Right.
And so, and by the way, if you're in your 20s, go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Try. I mean, if you want to make it,
Throw darts at the wall.
yeah, go for it. Throw the spaghetti up against the wall, see if it sticks,
Right.
or if it slides down.
Right.
And find out, because it might be that
Right.
you're supposed to be an artist.
Sure.
Why not give it a try while
Right.
you're young, single, and have the energy
For sure.
for doing it? At the same time, both and
Yeah.
be training yourself in something that you can make a living at.
Right.
Do both at the same time.
You're right. It's like what is the name of the researcher talks about being a T-shaped person, having a kind of wide spectrum of skills that you maybe you're a jack of all trades, but having at least one area of specialty.
Yeah.
So finding one area for you to have greater depth, so that T, the upper bar of the T, would be the kind of this wide range of things that you're good at, and that long perpendicular bar to the T is the depth, the areas of knowledge that you have that are greater than other areas of knowledge and expertise and practice. She also talks about there are also E-shaped people who have, maybe 3 bars of expertise. They have a wide range of skills, but there are particular bars that maybe they might not be quite as long, but they are in depth and maybe they connect with one another. Maybe they
Sure, and
relate
like with the E, you've got the 3 bars.
Yeah.
And you have the vertical bar that connects them all.
Exactly.
And it may be that you integrate those.
Yeah.
And that's a favorite word of mine, is integrate.
Yep.
Put stuff together, make it work together.
Yeah.
And
So good.
And the other thing, one comment I do want to make for sure, because people always ask me this about going to college. I believe in work. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I believe in work. I think work is a huge part. It's not our only part. It's not the only thing, but work is a huge part of our identity, who we are. Right. It is. And so it's important. It's productive. Right. It's meaningful. Yeah. It makes a difference in the world. Right. And it makes a difference in your life if you make money and can pay your bills. Right. So I want to say this. If you're going to go to college, and there's people that will shoot me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. My advice would be go to work between 20 and 40 hours a week. Go work at Costco or wherever, and get yourself a good job that's steady work, and take 1 or 2 classes at a time. Let's say, and it could be apprenticeship, it could be continuing education classes, or it could be regular college courses. Mm-hmm. But what would be so wrong? For example, let's say you did want to go to college. Nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you say, instead of taking a 4-year degree, I don't know who came up with the idea of a 4-year degree. I call it an 8-year degree. Mm. And because the average student at my university is 27 years old. Mm. Okay, mm-hmm. So that should give you some idea that not everybody's doing this in 4 years. Okay, so the point is what if I'm working at Costco, and let's say, I don't know, I get an associate's degree in, I don't know, whatever it is I'm interested in studying. And then when I finish that, then let's say I stay there 4 years. So I take 4 years to get a 2-year associate degree, right? Right. But I've got now 4 years of experience. Right. And I'm 22 years old or something like that, whatever. Okay, now I've got 4 years of experience, and I have either an apprenticeship done or I have an associate's degree. Now I've got a decision to make. Do I continue, going forward with my education or not? If not, that's fine. Right. Keep growing, in your work. But let's say you decide, now I teach human resources. So now let's say you come to me and I'll say, well, human resources is a great career to get into. We have a high placement rate. Almost everybody gets a job. They get a good job. They get a good job with benefits and all that. Well, that sounds good to me. Okay, fine. So then you go to Costco and you're working there for 2 years, and you say, hey, I just talked to Dr. Strubler over at Oakland University, and this is a shameless promotion, by the way, just so you know. And so what happens is I'm going to get a degree in human resources. Can I go work in the human resource department over at Costco? Could I? I've been here for 2 years or 4 years. I've been a great employee. I really want to go into human resources. Could I go over there? And by the way, will you pay for my classes? Okay, don't forget that. And the reason I'm saying this is if you take 8 years to go through, whether it's again, apprenticeship or associate's or bachelor's degree, take your time and get 8 years of experience. Now you're 26 years old or something like that. And you've got your degrees, you've got your education, you've got your certificates or apprenticeships. You're maybe a master trades person, whatever you want to become. Now you've got everything you need. You can make a living. Yeah. You can be independent in the proper sense. Right. Independent meaning you can pay your own bills and all that sort of thing. And you can move forward in your life. Yeah. And so I ask you, what's wrong with this picture? Right. What's wrong with taking 8 years to get your training or education, either one, and getting experience as you go?
It was a huge difference for me going to school as a 17-year-old to ages 19 years old, and dropping out to pursue art full time, and then going back to school at age 21 and having an established business to apply the business knowledge to, which I was pursuing, of course, business in college. And you were an integral part in me deciding that I could both work and go to school at the same time, take a lighter load. And that was super helpful. And it came to a point for me where I felt like, okay, I've got enough information here. It's time for me to expand and grow this business. And I actually took business models from school models that I learned and applied them to my business. And that helped me to grow what I have today and continue to grow what I have. It's super helpful if you're going to work, not only because you're not going to go into debt because you're creating an income, right? And you're taking less classes, so your expenses are less, you're spending less money, but you're also you're able to apply the knowledge that you're taking in to your work. You know, in that scenario, right, where you're going to school for HR and you're maybe talking to your employer about a large company where there are positions open and where there are programs like that. If you could go back to your 25-year-old self, then, what advice would you give him?
Well, for me, as I told you, I became purpose driven, as I said, and it hit me when I was about 25, 26, and I went crazy. And so my advice to myself is slow down. And in other words, think in a more, think about the future. Think and realize that you don't have to do everything at once. You know, and
I need to hear this right now.
Yeah, because
Sure.
well, because there's, and especially if you're an ambitious,
Just became a therapy session.
Yeah.
For me.
But if you're an ambitious person, you just want to get it all done and you want to do it all at once. And you might be trying to do 10 things at once.
Sure.
And then you find yourself frazzled and you're tired, you're irritable, you're not as nice to be around sometimes.
Sure.
And but the main thing is that you become frustrated and tired and worn out, or like I was, burnt out. And seriously, when I said I was burnt out, I couldn't. For 4 months, I could hardly get out of bed. It was that bad.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't recommend that. So don't do what I did, and that's what I would say to my 25-year-old self: is don't do what I did. But the other side of it is, you've got to have time for friends, connectedness, and now. Just by contrast, of course, I'm much older now, and I'm in a different place in my life. I still work full time, still work long hours, but not like that.
Right.
I probably stick to 40, 45 hours a week, something in that range.
Right.
And of course, I have the flexibility as a professor. I'll get up in the middle of the night and start grading papers or something,
yeah, it's
or
awesome.
writing an article like I did yesterday. And so I have some freedom, and that's the nice thing about being older. You can do that, and you may not have
lucky
that.
dog, you.
But I will still say, for millennials in particular, that age group, which is what, 20-something to 30-something,
Sure.
that age group right now,
32, 4 or something like that.
you can spread this out, and if you can look ahead, and this is the executive function of the brain talking now, just so you know. And say, okay, in 8 years, this is where I want to be. Now, you may not end up exactly there, but you can't steer a ship unless it's moving. You can turn the steering wheel on the ship, but if you're not moving, it doesn't do anything. And so, moving forward is probably one of the most important things. So, sometimes young people, well, people of all ages, say to me, "I don't know what to do next." Okay, let's just start with, let's talk about your interests, let's talk about your background, let's talk about putting all that together, and then let's talk about opportunities that might be out there that you can explore. The act of exploring your future is nonetheless an act. Okay? Sitting and ruminating and feeling bad about yourself and not making any progress is very depressing. And the more depressing it gets, the less likely you are to move forward.
Right.
So and I learned this from rock climbing. I was a rock climber. And what I found is that as I was climbing up the rock, you can't see where the next handhold is. You just can't. And that's kind of what it's like when you're in that position, regardless of your age. I can't see what's next. I can't see what job am I supposed to do, or am I supposed to get married? Am I supposed to do this or that? All these questions. The answer is this: reach up, find the handhold. Okay, whatever handhold there is, it might be a good handhold, might not be, might just be a temporary handhold, And then what happens is you raise your foot up. And when you climb, by the way, you keep the weight on your feet, not on your hands. Or you'll wear yourself out. So you step up. Now here's the trick. You don't know where the next handhold is because you can't see it. And until you actually stand and straighten out your knee, you're not going to be able to reach up and find where the next handhold is. I call it the great adventure of faith. Life is a great adventure of faith.
Yeah.
And I believe that God made us this way. He designed us for this purpose, to go on this great adventure of faith. And when we don't know what to do, the thing to do is to look up and move.
So good.
To look up and move. And if you can look up and move, but you've got to move because you can't steer a ship that's not moving.
Right. It's good. Dinner's here. It's great, man. Well put. A time we can pause for a quick second if you want to grab that. Yeah.
As I was saying about rock climbing, a metaphor for life.
Right.
Is that you have to move in your life. You have to climb. You will encounter resistance as you go. Even as you're exploring, you'll run into people who say, oh, you don't want to do that, or you're not cut out for that.
Sure.
Don't listen to that. And that's a discipline too, is to not listen to the negative voices that you hear and to not listen to the negative voices in your own head, but to just move. See, if I'm busy moving, if my life is full of movement, there's no space in it for negative ruminating. There's no time for negative ruminating. And so that's why we want to have full lives. And a lot of people are saying, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. The answer is take the first step. So whatever interests you, whatever you think, in fact, as I was talking to my friend yesterday, he had an idea. He wanted to bounce it off of me. I'm thinking about possibly doing this. And I said, I think that's a great idea to explore. I said, I can't tell you that it's the right thing.
Right.
In fact, I would suggest that you ask God. But beyond that, you have to go explore it. You have to do the work of the explorer.
Right.
And I've spent many, many weeks and months in the mountains exploring, having no idea, in some cases, where I was going.
Right.
Except that I knew I was trying to get toward a summit.
Right.
I knew that. But I'd never seen it before. I'd never encountered that terrain before.
Right.
And I could have complained about it. Could have complained about the stream I had to cross. I could have complained about the brush that I had to, go through, and it was cutting me all up while I was going through it. I could have, or the rocky field, or whatever the case might be. It does little good. In fact, it does a great deal of harm to complain. I believe that even our suffering, I'll even go further, especially our suffering, is there as a test for us. And if you want to reduce your suffering by 50%, stop complaining about it. It's that simple. Accept it.
So good.
Because every one of us right now, and especially during COVID, we're all experiencing, like the couple that's got 2 kids and you're trying to homeschool and you're going, I'm not a teacher. What am I doing? Trying to homeschool my kids. And both of us are trying to work out of the home. And we don't have enough internet for them to go to school and for us to do our jobs. And so we're all faced with these kinds of difficult situations, every single one of us. It doesn't matter who you are. And you could argue, well, mine's not as bad as yours, or mine's worse than yours, or whatever. It's irrelevant. You know why? Because it's yours. That's all that matters. The test that you're facing right now, whatever it may be, is yours. Don't resist it. Don't fight it. Walk and work through it. But you have to take a step. You have to explore. You have to find ways through and around things. And it requires effort. but not to be driven, to be led by your purpose. Because as you're going through your challenges, as you're going through your suffering, or whatever the case might be, the question is, who am I? Whose am I? What is my purpose? And is the direction I'm going consistent with that purpose? And if it's not, then you need to pick another direction.
Right.
It's that simple. And so in some ways, life is hard on one hand, but not as complicated as we make it. A lot of times, I mean, we would argue that complexity has increased, largely because of technology, to be honest, I think. But even given that, the bottom line is go right back to your foundation. Take time to contemplate, what is my purpose? And then, what are my talents and abilities and interests and experiences that I've had? How can I integrate them toward that purpose and move forward in my life? I guarantee you, every single human being on the planet has a purpose. Not everyone finds it. But that's my encouragement, and I'll spend the rest of my life devoting myself to encouraging people, to discovering that purpose, getting connected to the people that are tied to that purpose. Because once you know your purpose, guess what? You'll get connected to people. You know, like right now, as an artist, you're getting connected to other artists. Okay, why? Well, because you're following that purpose. Then you meet people that also are following that purpose.
Sure.
And then pretty soon you have something called a community.
Right.
Well, what is our number one health factor? Community.
Right.
Connectedness.
Right.
And we can find it in the arts. We can find it in the factory. We can find it anywhere we go. It doesn't matter. We can find it at home. And that's what's exciting about life.
Right.
And as I said, I'm 68 years old. I'm not retired. I'm rewired.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I'm rewired.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I left administration. And my joke is I always tell people that I gave up administration and alcohol for Lent on the same day and for the same reason. And so
Beautiful.
after 39 years of administrative work, which I thought I couldn't do anything else, now all of a sudden I find myself a professor, a writer, a community organizer. And I'm going, how did I get here? But if you think about it, it's the integration of everything I've ever done in my life. That's what it is.
Right.
And so at any stage in our life, we can take all of our past experiences, even if we're only, 20 years old.
Right.
We can take our past experiences, our past knowledge, our past successes. What did we learn from our failures? Failure is the most important thing there is.
Right.
And I'm going to say this. If you're going to fail big.
Right.
Go all the way.
Yeah.
Because from that failure, you will learn. You will learn things.
Yeah.
Now, you can say that it defeats me, or you can say I learned from it. That's a choice. That is always a choice. I failed. I ran for State House of Representatives. I lost after a hard battle. I lost by 1%, 1.3%. It was the closest race in the state. And the way I look at it is that it was my greatest failure. I loved it. When we went to
in the positive sense, your greatest failure is in
Yeah, and when we went to Denali, Denali is 20,320 feet high. We made it to 19,300 feet. I failed. I failed. After 5 years of training and schooling and planning and money spent and everything, I failed. Wow, did I fail big, though? Because, because think about
big
it.
Difference.
The highest mountain I'd ever climbed before that was only 14,000 feet. I just set a new personal record of 5,000 feet higher than I'd ever climbed before. I met people from all over the world. I met people from Japan and Scotland and Italy. And, I mean, it was a fabulous failure.
Yeah.
So go out there and try things.
Yeah.
I don't say do things foolishly. I don't mean take risks that are going to get you killed or something like that. But before I climbed that mountain, I spent 5 years preparing for it.
Right.
I was well trained to climb that mountain, and I climbed it safely. But it didn't quite make it to the top.
Right.
Okay. So failure is a wonderful thing, and you should enjoy your failures.
Love it. Enjoy your failures. What's a time that you've laughed hardest?
Well, when I was running a program for kids, and these were kids that had gotten into some trouble with the law,
Okay.
and so I had one kid. His name was Alan, and we were going on a wilderness trip to the Porcupine Mountains, which is in northwestern Michigan, almost into the next state. And it's rugged territory and everything. And we had hiked that day 11 miles, bushwhacking, no trails, straight through the woods following a compass. And Alan was lagging in the back behind, and he didn't want to be there and all this stuff. And it was obvious from his behavior, he did not want to be there. So we got to the camp, and Alan was, sitting around camp, and I went into my tent. And then all of a sudden, one of the other kids, I think there were 9 kids if I recall, Alan's gone. Where the heck is Alan, And I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, it's just a Porcupine Mountain, park. And they said, well, we think he went that way. So now keep in mind, I just hiked 11 miles with a backpack on through the woods. So I put on my boots, and these old heavy leather boots, and I ran down that trail for 6 miles. And I got to the end of the trail, and I came to a road, and there was Alan. Now it's dark, okay? It's dark. It's in the middle of the night. There's no cars. There's no people. There's no nothing. And so Alan is there, and I said, Alan, listen, I take it you don't want to be here. He goes, right. He was a man of few words. I said, well, we got to go back, because you can't stand out here all night. So we hiked 6 miles back. So 23 miles that day. And it was kind of crazy. So I'm sound asleep in the morning, because I'm exhausted. And someone wakes me up again and says, Alan's gone again. I go, well, which way did he go this time? They said, well, we think he went that way, which was a different direction. So anyway, we started to we had to hike all the way to the ranger station, and there was Alan. I found him there, and I brought him back again. And so we hiked all the way out. We hiked all the way back. And in the meantime, I did call his social worker to let him know that he kept running away. And so we go back, and we're on our way back to the camp. Now picture this: it's pouring down rain, and the brush is we're on a trail, but the brush around us is probably about 4 feet tall. 4.5 feet tall. So you can't see anything. And there's big trees around us and everything. So if you can picture, it's pouring down rain. And all of a sudden, I'm in the front, and I hear, bear! And I said, where? And they said, right there. Well, Alan was at the back of the line where the bear was. Okay. And so I said, all right, drop your packs. Get rid of any food you have on you. Leave it behind, because you don't want the bear, trying to get it from you. Right. And so we ran up into the woods. So now we're in, up neck deep in brush, and we're in the woods, and we're going uphill, and we're going to circle back around. I had a plan, and I just knew we had to get away from the bear, because I was responsible for the safety of all these young kids. So we circled our way up. Well, all of a sudden, I'm standing at the top of a hill, and I look, and I see the brush moving. And it's moving toward us. And it's right behind Alan. And so Alan turns around and there's the bear right on his tail. It was great, and he falls down, and the bear almost runs him over.
Alan had it coming.
And he takes his nose and he puts his nose right on Alan's foot.
Oh my God.
He touched him,
Right.
you know, and of course that's his mouth, you know, and he fortunately was just sniffing him. So one of the guys in the group, who's very large, he grabs a big log. I mean, it must have been like 8 feet long, great big log, puts it up over his head, and charges the bear. And of course, he was much bigger than the bear was at that point. He was huge. He was a huge guy. The bear backs off. So I said, all right, everybody, let's circle back around. And the bear clearly is not trying to hurt us.
Right.
The bear, it wants food.
Right.
And he wants us to give it to him.
It's hungry.
And he's yeah. And so, but I always say there is justice in the world, because if I can say it, Alan really deserved that. After all that he put me through.
That's fair.
And so we made it back to the ranger station. We reported it. Did the bear touch anyone? Yes, he did. And so the Rangers went out, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, and shot the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was sad.
Yeah.
But it was quite
Wake up call for Alan.
It was a wake up call for Alan, and I hope he's doing well now in his 50s or something.
Right.
And I hope he always remembers that experience.
I'm sure he's telling that story too. Well, Dr. Strubler, it's been awesome. Super fun to chat with you,
really
and
has.
I've enjoyed it. And if folks want to find out more about you, anything else you want to add, or contact info, or they can go on the OU website, or
They can go to the OU website. You can Google me.
read your articles there.
And also, you can go to psychologytoday.com. That's all. It's just psychologytoday.com. You can type in my name. Or my blog is called Doesn't Get Any Better. Because every time somebody asks me how I'm doing, I say, it doesn't get any better.
Right. Classic Strubler.
So go there. You can read my articles there.
Yeah.
You can Google me. I'm also on LinkedIn as well.
Sure.
So if you want to contact me through LinkedIn or become my friend, happy to connect with anyone there.
Awesome.
And we're passionately involved with the arts. Our whole family is, and so we spend a lot of time at our favorite place, 20 Front Street, in Lake Orion.
Yeah.
Wonderful venue.
Awesome venue if you're in the
Detroit
Michigan area.
Symphony Orchestra Hall.
Yeah.
We're known to frequent there once in a while, and two great places if you're artists to go. So I just want to leave you with the idea that life is good and challenging, and if you say it that way, and I'm giving you these words on purpose, because it is good. And if you stop and think about all the things that are good in your life and everything you're grateful for, first of all, that gives you perspective. And instead of calling everything a problem, call it a challenge, because it is. And because challenges are to be overcome. And again, you don't go around them, you go through them. And you work through them and you come out the other side. And that's really what life is. It's good. And it's challenging, and it's a great adventure of faith.
That's it. It's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, as always.
All right.
Looking forward to many more.
All right. Let's do it. I'd love it. I'd love to have you back. Drop the mic.
That was so good.